So good day once again. So this is now the continuation of our discussion on international communication and globalization. For our previous topic, we discussed about the concept of what is a globalization and what is international communication. And later, and up next to that is we interrelate what globalization is and what international communication is and the importance of globalizing our communication. And we provided set of examples of what is international communication is, some basic examples that will give us the idea of what is international communication per se. So in continuation of our discussion, what I will be discussing is about the impacts of globalization on employment, virtual interactions, cultural awareness, in speech and in body language, time differences, information sharing, and time management. To begin with, so let's take note of the impact of globalization to employment. As we all know that the Philippines is one of the best countries when it comes to call center companies and when it comes to online English teaching. So many are putting up their own business here in the Philippines. One, because of low cost. So our rent here, office rent here is very cheap. And when it comes to tax, um, there is not much to pay for the businesses coming from other countries. They're paying less as compared to the tax that they're paying if they were putting up their own business in their own country. So it's less cost on their part. So next, another thing when it comes to low cost is the salary for the employees. So the average salary of call center agent or for ESL teacher or online teachers range from at least 15,000. So if you're just going to compute that to dollars, so it is actually a lot cheaper as compared to if they will be putting up their own businesses in their own country and they're paying high tax, high salary as compared to the manpower here. And aside from that, what is attracting them to put up their business here in our country is because of the work habit of the Filipinos. So most of the Filipinos work really well, and they really have that compassion when it comes to their clients, their customers, especially the customer service representative. And third, we are actually fluent when it comes to English. We can imitate other accent. We can imitate American accent. We can imitate Australian accent. So the Filipinos have that kind of ability, thus making them more popular to to be considered as a source for manpower. So, and with that, just to sum what I have mentioned, some of what I've mentioned. So people need to understand the dynamics of long distance collaboration, the impact of culture and manners of speaking in body language, and how to use the communication technology with people on other side of the globe. And again, one of the best examples for that is on how we are utilizing the call center companies when communicating across the globe. Then virtual interaction. So considering that we are now experiencing pandemic nowadays, it becomes common for us to have virtual interaction. So most of the work were done virtually. So we call the work from home. And let's say the meetings are also done through virtual interactions through using a virtual platforms like Zoom or Google Meet. And it can also be a way for us to maximize the use of this technology when it comes to business. So modern entrepreneurs need to understand the strengths and limitations of different communications media and how to use each medium to maximum effect. If we're just going to look at what others are doing right now when they are into selling their products through online, so most of them would utilize live selling. If we're just going to think of that in a global context, I don't know how it can be possible, but that is a good concept. But locally speaking, many are using that kind of platform in order for them to sell their products. They are utilizing live selling in order for them to really invite more people to buy their products and to introduce their products, which is something that would really give them more profit Others will be just posting their products through using the social media, and then they will be just using a lot more visual effects to make it more pleasing to the eyes of their target customers. And it's really an advantageous move on part of the entrepreneurs on maximizing that kind of digital marketing tools because it is less expensive as compared to if you will be promoting your products through other media platforms like television, radio, or even newspaper, which cost them a lot. So marketing your products in social media is less expensive. It is for that reason that many are into digital marketing. So in if a business is into that kind of approach, they have to understand now the limitations of different communications media and how to use them to its maximum effect. And actually, that is already an implication of what globalization is. And with that kind of workplace dynamics that we are seeing right now in terms of globalization, it's an indicator that we are now reaching different every corners of the world because of the invention of the internet. And of course, in virtual interaction, there's still a need for us. Again, when you're doing marketing, when you are into selling, it's a form of communication. But we are also looking at some considerations when it comes to, let's say, etiquette when you're sending email or when you're talking to cell phone, when you're dealing with businesses, or what call this virtual meeting, you have to observe proper etiquette. The next is cultural awareness in speech. So we all know that every country has its own culture, every country has its own practices, and there's no such thing as universal culture, considering that every nation, even regions from each nation, or even communities in each nation, every nation has its subculture. So from a global perspective, we have to look into account that um, every nation has its own culture, every nationality. So for modern entrepreneurs and employees, they need to have the ability to catch subtle nuances of people's manner of speech when communicating across cultures. If it's only just your first time to go on that particular place or to meet someone coming from a different culture, there is a need for you to do some background research. You really need to know where this person comes from, what is the culture of this person. It's your assignment to do so in order for you to really win the heart. Let's say, for instance, you were tasked by your boss to close a deal with someone, and then you have to win the heart, of course, of your client in order to close the deal. So you really need to do some background research. Or as while conversing with a person, you should be somehow stepping back. You have to look into account how the person speak, observe how the person speak, and because that could be your way in order for you to really catch the attention of your client. So you really need to look at the expressions, the mannerisms of the person who you're talking with. So it's actually a technique or strategy to study the behavior of the person you're talking with, and you can utilize the same approach if you will be tasked by your boss. Let's say if you would like to close a certain deal to someone. Another thing, for example, is that in Japanese business culture, it can be considered rude to ask personal questions. Again, it is rude to ask personal questions in an initial business meeting because you're not yet that close. How come that you will be starting to ask personal questions to the person you're talking with if that is the very person that you meet? And until such time that you are now close with the person, I think that's the time that you can now begin to ask some personal questions if the relationship is already strengthened, if you really have that very close relationship. So I think that's the time that you can ask some personal questions. But for a initial business meeting, I doubt that's improper because you're crossing the border. In the US or in the United States, asking personal questions and sharing personal information can display warmth and openness. So you can really see the difference between the Japanese culture and the US culture, wherein in Japanese business culture, they are preserved when it comes to personal questions. However, for US, for the Americans, it's asking a personal question is okay. Why? Because they're doing it. So whenever they're transacting with others, because probably because of the confidence that they have, then they can ask personal questions. Then um, might as well you can ask personal questions to them because that's what they are doing with other clients. So it's 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 very apparent how these two cultures differ from one another. So with that, American and Japanese business people understand this about each other, can communicate in ways that resonate more effectively with each other. So let's say an American and a Japanese will be closing a deal and they are particular with the differences of their culture, then they should step back. They should be adjusting on how they can win the heart of each other. Another thing is that awareness of cultural differences in body language can be just as important as the nuances of speech. So when we are talking of language, we're not only just pertaining to language or to verbal per se, to to the words that we say. We are also pertaining to the nuances of our body. So if you will be communicating with others coming from a different culture, you really need to understand the way they speak, the mannerisms, their gestures. And in order for you to understand or to know acceptable speaking distances, conflict styles, the proper eye contact and posture in different cultures, accepting the physical expressions of their own culture that are not universally accepted. So there are some countries wherein they are considering eye contact as respectful, while in other country, if you are talking to them in eye to eye, for them it's a form of being disrespectful. So we really need to be particular on that. Next is time differences. So the advent of global collaboration introduces another new dynamic to communication skills. So a while ago, we mentioned the virtual interaction. Where in virtual interaction, there is a way for us to connect with others in a virtual form, let's say through meeting, video call. We can do meetings through that, or through email. You can send now messages through email anytime, anywhere you want. But there is a challenge when it comes to communicating with others, especially during, let's say, you're tasked to call someone, but the person whom you are going to call will be coming from a different country, has a different time zone as yours, say 12 different time zone. So how are you going to manage that? So I think it's very important that you have to set schedule when you would like to talk with the person. So you do not just directly talk to the person without mentioning the schedule. So you really need to set a schedule and follow the schedule for you to avoid problem or conflict in which you will look like disrespectful of calling the person during the wee hours. So being able to effectively share information between shifts can make or break the productivity of a geographically dispersed team, making this an important issue for many companies. The same, let's say, for example, there is a 12-hour difference when it comes to work. Let's say most of your employees are working in the Philippines and then your boss comes from, let's say, a different other country. And then he has to monitor if you're working or not. So who will be adjusting? Of course, usually ang mga employees are the ones who are adjusting, especially if their clients are coming from other countries. Let's say in call center companies, diba? That's the reason why we have day shift and night shift from 9 to 12 because they have to adjust on the time zone of their customers. And that's really a challenge. However, since it has been the practice of the particular BPO companies or most of the companies in the Philippines, they get just used to it, working from 9 p.m. to to let's say 6 or 8 p.m., they just get used to that. In terms of information sharing, other groups prefer to communicate indirectly. They ask questions reluctantly for fear of damaging relationships or appearing incompetent. So in order for them to really not look like incompetent, they will be asking questions in such a way that people will not be judging them, that they do not know what they're doing. So people are afraid that to be judged because of the things that they do. So in order for them to avoid such, they will be communicating indirectly by asking questions reluctantly. So when sharing information, direct communications need to probe more, and indirect communicators need to speak up when problems arise. So information sharing is very important to others, and it's very important to each and every one of us, because information will be utilized for the productivity of a certain work, diba? So in time management, some cultures treat time as limited. For example, employees in the United States typically view tasks as linear and sequential. Ibig sabihin, step by step pero kung sinusunod. They complete one task at a time and schedule appointments that dictate when and where they meet with other people. So that's what makes it linear and sequential. So you really need to set a schedule. Other cultures such as Latinos view time as abundant, so they may be reluctant to end one conversation just because it's time to go to another meeting. Okay, so nakita niyo din, sa Philippines kasi we can do things, that depends eh. Most of the time, Filipinos can do multitask eh. They can do things while doing other things at the same time. Um, they can perform other things other than what they are supposed to do. So we'll get use of multitasking. While in other countries, let's say Western countries, they are very much particular of of being linear and sequential when it comes to the task. So one at a time. Sa Philippines kasi, more at a time. However, chronic lateness, yung Filipino time, might be perceived as a performance issue by another culture. So in the Philippines, we still have that a habit of Filipino time, but in other cultures, mostly Western culture, they're very much particular of the time. Some neighboring Asian countries like China, Japan, and Korea, they're very much particular of the time, because for them, time should be respected. If you respect their time, you're respecting them as well. So you can be more productive if you are time efficient. So setting team expectations at the start of any project can minimize any misconceptions and avoid conflict. So ito yung isa sa mga kultura ng ibang bansa wherein they're setting timeline, um, they're very sequential on what to do and what to do next. And through this approach, they are able to minimize any misconceptions and avoid conflict that may arise in the near future because of their particularity of the time, which is somehow not that very much popular among Filipinos. Yung tayo kasi we have this kind of mamayana ngayon or the manana habit, and it's really affecting the productivity. That's why there are a lot of pile of papers in some of the offices because of that manana habit that we have, which is should not be the practice because it's really affecting our productivity. It is not all affecting us, but also affecting those people whom we are working with. Then, so um, that would be all for the second part of our discussion when it comes to the impacts of globalization. So uh, I'm hoping that you already now get idea on how diverse globalization is.